understand that you've been hoping for a speaker who can dazzle you with his charm, wit, and personality. I'm pleased to be filling in while the search continues. Who am I? Who am I? Have you ever asked yourself that question? I recently underwent a test. It was nothing serious. For once, it wasn't a medical test. I'm perfectly healthy. Well, not perfect, but you know what I mean. I took the test because I was curious, and the outcome was a big surprise. It turns out that I actually have a personality. I didn't know that. Comments from acquaintances in my old life had led me to believe otherwise. Now, years ago, in my first marriage, my wife and I were among the very first to have a telephone answering machine. Wasn't my idea. I have an aversion to telephones. Anyway, an in-law that I haven't heard from in years called us one day while we were away, and her answering machine answered the phone. Now, she was a little miffed, but she did leave a message. She sounded offended when she informed us that we were not important enough to have an answering machine. Imagine not being important enough to have an answering machine. Should I feel guilty because Beth and I have voicemail? Well, even my wife at the time had ways of telling me that I wasn't very important. I have to confess that in those days I was inclined to be a victim. And I was good at it. I was even proud of it. After all, I was right. So, she had to be wrong. You know what I'm saying? Still, I could identify with Rodney Dangerfield when he said, "I don't get no respect." And I often wondered, what do I have to do to be important? Now, I know I'm not the only one who ever felt that way. One of the most important metaphysical writings of all time is the comic strip Peanuts. Charlie Brown and his friends at one time or another have provided us with the answers to most every important question we ask. And the sad thing is that Charlie Brown asks most of the questions. One day, Charlie Brown was talking to his friend Linus. He said, "You see, Linus, goes all the way back to the beginning. The moment I was born and set foot on the stage of life, they took one look at me and said, 'Not right for the part.'" Now, there is a reason we find Peanuts amusing. A lot of us identify with Snoopy, but probably more of us identify with Charlie Brown. We've gone through major portions of our lives feeling like misfits. Have you ever felt like a leftover, like overstocks in a used bookstore? I hope I'm not the only one. So when I discovered that I do have a personality, I was thrilled, but then I wondered, I have a personality. What does that tell me? And I found an answer in Emily Cady's Lessons in Truth. In Lesson 7, Emily Cady defined both personality and individuality. Now, I always thought I knew what those terms meant, but according to Ms. Cady, what I thought is not truth. And I've always thought that personality and individuality were interchangeable terms. I was wrong. Their meanings are counter to each other. In fact, as one increases, the other decreases. My personality is what I see when I look into the mirror. Early in the morning, that's scary. What I see is the human part of me. My personality is the external me, the part of me that most of you see. And it changes from time to time as my mood changes or as my physical circumstances change. And you may like my personality or you may not. That's not my problem. You see, that's simply how your personality perceives my personality. So, what did the test tell me about my personality? Well, the test was the Rizzo-Hudson Enneagram Type Indicator. With a fancy name like that, it has to be good. Even better than Smuckers. Now, its purpose is to tell us our basic personality types. and it told me that my dominant personality type is peacemaker. I couldn't have been more proud. In my opinion, the world needs more peacemakers and fewer of the other 8 personality types. That was before I found out what personalities do. Our personalities determine how we adapt to our environments, to the people we encounter, and to the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Our personality types largely determine the boundaries of our comfort zones. Now, peacemakers like me function through the ways they cope with the emotions of anger and rage. No way, I thought. That couldn't be me. I'm not an angry person at all. In fact, I'm noted for my patience. In the 22 years Beth and I have been together, she has never heard me lose my temper. Ask her.
Sure.
There's just no way I could be driven by anger or rage. Fear or shame? Perhaps. But surely not anger or rage. Well, this suggested to me that it was time to step back and take an objective look at my life. I didn't like what I found out. I discovered that I had created my comfort zone in such ways as to deny my anger. My ways of coping with my anger have run from being emotionally unavailable to being passive-aggressive. Yes, dear. Whatever you say, dear. This is typical of peacemakers. We go out of our way to avoid conflict. Now, every one of the personality types has these negative or destructive ways to cope. There are also positive ways that help each personality cope with its underlying emotions. Like all peacemakers, I can be patient, steady, easygoing, receptive, agreeable, comforting, and more. All personality types are stocked with a myriad of positive potentials, all gifts from our Creator. Each personality type has its own list of potentials and its own list of limitations or boundaries. The good thing is that any one of us can develop all the potentials for all of the types. We just have to become aware of them, and that requires us to step beyond the boundaries of our comfort zones. Now, this brings me to Emily Cady's definition of individualism. Individuality, she says, is the God self. She says that the more a person expresses God, the more individualized he or she becomes. Now, God, as we've been told again and again, has gifted us with wisdom and intelligence, love, power, and of course everything else absolute good. For a good many years, my personality type has kept me from understanding that truth. The stronger our personalities, the weaker our individualism. To know my God self, I have to expand my horizons beyond the boundaries of my personality type. That's not an easy thing to do. I've been cultivating my personality for many years. I was taught to color inside the lines. Now, behaving inside the boundaries of my personality type has become a habit. It's like an addiction. Asking me to act as a different personality stirs up symptoms of withdrawal. I feel uncomfortable. I want to get back into my comfort zone. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Now, we're talking about Extreme Makeover Spiritual Edition. This requires us to realize who we truly are. Now, I've been told that my individuality, the authentic me, should not be difficult to find. That's because God never changes. That means that who I really am, my God self, never changes. It will always be right where I left it. It's never puffed up. It's never governed by likes and dislikes. This doesn't mean that I don't have likes and dislikes. They may influence, but they do not control how I live my life. My God self also doesn't bring out those negative characteristics in other people. Now, living up to this standard is a challenge. But this is the me that I'd like to see when I look into the mirror. I have to overcome some habits that have never brought out the best in me. For example, I've often been just like Shu in the comic strip of the same name. When it comes to believing in myself, I'm an agnostic. For years, I've never thought of myself as a child of an all-powerful, loving God. I had no awareness of my God self. Something needed to change. Now, the first step in our transformation is to become aware of who we truly are. Each of us has been created with unlimited potential, more than the potentials typical of our personalities. We need to explore what those other potentials are, especially the potentials outside the boundaries of our personalities. Now, how many times have you heard it said that each one of us is essential to God's plan? Now, it occurs to me that all 9 personality types are represented by the people sitting in this room. Because I am a peacemaker, I take back my assertion that the world needs more peacemakers and fewer of the other 8 personality types. I acknowledge that the world needs your personality type. We peacemakers avoid conflict at all costs. I do want you to like me. Now, some of you are probably reformers. You're the ones who believe you're here for a reason. And you probably think that there should be more reformers and fewer of the other types. You feel a strong sense of mission. You feel very strongly about what's right and what's wrong. You feel you're driven to improve yourself and the world around you. I guess the world needs you as much as it does peacemakers. On the other hand, you can be opinionated, impatient, rigid, critical, even self-critical, sarcastic, and judgmental. Do you know anybody like that? Now, some of you might be helpers. Are you generally well-intentioned, compassionate, generous, and forgiving? You're among the most people-oriented of the personality types. What would the world be without you? Then again, you might be a people-pleaser and a flatterer. You can be ingratiating, clingy, or insincere. Sound familiar? Now, you may notice a pattern here. Each of the personalities I've mentioned may behave in positive ways or in negative ways and stay within its comfort zone. It's all a matter of consciousness. How many times have you heard that one? Well, it's true. It's all consciousness. It all depends on whether you're operating from ego consciousness or the Christ consciousness. Now, I'm betting you can guess which consciousness is which. Now, it occurs to me that if God's plan is going to work, the world needs achievers. These are the folks who are most comfortable getting things done. They're goal-oriented, ambitious, and organized. I don't know how we could get by without them. But if their egos are in charge, they're likely to be excessively driven, appropriate rather than sincere, competitive, and self-promoting. Then I wish they'd leave. When the Christ consciousness overcomes the ego, they will be well-adjusted, gracious, interested in others, and self-accepting. Take your pick. Another personality type is the individualist. And this gets a little confusing because the Enneagram does not define the individualist the same way Emily Cady does. Remember, Emily Cady said that the individualized person is conscious of the God self. He or she regularly expresses through the Christ consciousness. On the other hand, according to the Enneagram, the individual may be moody, emotionally demanding, self-absorbed, and temperamental. This individual is definitely coming from the ego. When the individual is conscious of the Christ within, he or she may be creative, inspired, emotionally strong, and humane. We really need this person on the team. Now, maybe this one is you. Do you have a keen desire to understand reality? Do you want to possess knowledge? Do you want to go where no one else has gone before? Do you want the freedom to explore your inner self? You ever want to be left alone so you can work on your own projects? You might be an investigator. Coming from a Christ consciousness, you're innovative, objective, understanding, playful, and compassionate. Wow, we need more people like you. I'd really like to get to know you better. But if you're coming from your ego, you're likely to be high-strung, impractical, uncompromising, extreme, and provocative. Maybe I don't want to know you better. Now here's one we'd all like to be around. Who doesn't like a loyalist? These are the people you can always count on. They're reliable, dutiful, hardworking, and persevering. At their best, they're courageous, cooperative, grounded, faithful, and affectionate. Then there are also loyalists who may be pessimistic, defensive, reactive, suspicious, and blaming. Let them be loyal to somebody else. Now here's a unity question for you. Who said, I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm and spring forth with a mighty faith to do the things that ought to be done by me? Yes. That was affirmed by Unity's co-founder, Charles Fillmore, when he was 94 years old. I aspire to that kind of enthusiasm, but I confess, it's not within the peacemaker comfort zone. Now, some people are always spontaneous and upbeat. Don't they just drive you crazy? How can they be so optimistic when I'm so miserable? They're the kind of people who make ordinary life into a celebration. Their happiness when their calendars are filled with things to do. And they're curious, eager, adventurous, and talkative. For them, variety is the spice of life. At their best, they're versatile, receptive, and accomplished. Like all the other types, though, they may have a dark side. They're likely to be thrill seekers. They can get into conflict by being excessive, impatient, overextended, and demanding. In Christ consciousness, we love them. Controlled by ego, watch out. Now I've saved this one for last. It describes my past life experience. I have forgiven her. It all came out of her personality type. She was a challenger. Challengers are power-oriented, dominating, decisive, willful, and confrontational. If you ask me, peacemakers should never marry challengers. Now, it's tempting for me to say that there should be fewer challengers in the world. However, in the Christ consciousness, challengers are honorable, empowering, generous, constructive, initiating, decisive, and inspiring. They may even be heroic. Without them, few things would ever change for the better. To be honest, I'm guessing that a challenger can become extremely frustrated married to a peacemaker. The point is that every personality type is essential to the plan. The real issue is whether that personality expresses the ego or expresses the Christ. It's all about Emily Cady's